What if one of the most powerful institutions in the world was quietly shaken from inside by a man no one saw coming? He wasn't part of the Vatican's inner circle. He didn't belong to a royal bloodline, a political dynasty, or a network of cardinals whispering in marble corridors. He rode the bus, lived in a one-room apartment, cooked his own meals. And yet, in March 2013, the world watched in stunned silence as Jorge Mario Bergoglio stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, alone, in plain white, no gold, no grandeur. He didn't offer a blessing. He asked for one. That moment didn't just mark a new pope. It marked something else. Something few could name, but everyone could feel. Because from the second he took the title of Francis, the ground under the Vatican began to shift. Quietly, consistently, and in ways that made many inside the church very uncomfortable. He didn't raise his voice. He asked questions. He didn't challenge tradition. He walked around it. And what followed was not just a papacy. It was a slow unraveling of silence, power, and secrets held for centuries. If you think this is serious, you'll be surprised by the ending of this story. Because what's happening behind the Vatican walls may change far more than just the church. Before the white robes, before the Vatican keys, before the billion eyes watching his every move, there was just Jorge. He grew up in a working-class neighborhood called Flores, in the heart of Buenos Aires. A small house, a tight-knit family, parents who had escaped war-torn Italy chasing safety, not influence. His father fixed trains. His mother taught him that power meant nothing if it wasn't used to serve. Jorge wanted nothing more than a quiet life. Maybe chemistry, maybe teaching. He liked science. He liked soccer. He liked being invisible. But then, at 21, everything stopped. A mysterious infection collapsed his lung. Breathing became a battle. Life turned into a question mark. For days, he hovered in silence between this world and something beyond. When he recovered, he didn't go back to the lab. He walked into a church and never really walked back out. That moment, unseen by cameras, unnoticed by the world, would trigger a transformation that even he didn't fully understand. He joined the Jesuits, the church's most disciplined, most intellectual, and often most rebellious order. It wasn't about ambition. It was about purpose. And Jorge, quiet and skeptical, began to change. He studied philosophy and theology, but more than that, he listened to the poor, to the broken, to the forgotten voices the church rarely heard. He didn't seek the spotlight, but the spotlight kept finding him. Because even when he tried to stay in the background, something about his conviction made the powerful take notice. He wasn't looking for authority, but the system he entered would keep pulling him toward it. And the higher he rose, the more dangerous that would become. Most men who rise in the church learn to play the game, speak carefully, climb quietly, blend in. But Jorge Mario Bergoglio didn't. In Buenos Aires, he became known simply as Padre Jorge. No chauffeur, no velvet robes. He rode the bus, walked the alleyways, showed up unannounced in the city's poorest neighborhoods, not with press, not with cameras, but with silence, soup, and scripture. He wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to understand. Every Thursday during Holy Week, he knelt to wash the feet of drug addicts and prisoners, not as performance, but as protest, a quiet rebellion against the hierarchy's comfort. And the system noticed. While others climbed cathedrals of power, Jorge kept ascending into slums, into shelters, into the lives of those the church often ignored. He didn't just pray for the poor. He asked why they were poor in the first place, why doctrine echoed louder than hunger, why political corruption was tolerated in places of worship. He didn't preach with thunder. He preached with questions. And questions, in the wrong hands, are dangerous. Politicians began to murmur. Powerful clergy grew restless. They said he was too close to the poor, too critical of the elite, too independent to be controlled. Surveillance wasn't off the table. He was warned, indirectly, discreetly, that his voice was becoming too loud. But he kept speaking. Because for Jorge, silence in the face of injustice wasn't neutrality. It was complicity. And while some saw him as a holy man, others saw something else, a threat to the balance of power. A priest who wouldn't stay in his place. A shepherd who might just burn the pasture to protect the flock. What they didn't know was this. The storm hadn't even started yet. In 1976, Argentina plunged into darkness. A military junta seized control, and when it came a wave of fear, that swallowed entire neighborhoods. People disappeared in the middle of the night. Teachers, students, priests, anyone suspected of dissent. Their names vanished. Their stories ended in silence. The church mostly watched. Some blessed the regime. Others turned away. And Jorge Mario Bergoglio? He was 39 years old, provincial leader of the Jesuits. And right in the middle of it all, this is where the lines blur. Two of his Jesuit priests, Orlando Yorio and Francisco Jalix, were kidnapped, imprisoned for 5 months. And for years, rumors circled. Did Bergoglio betray them? Could he have done more? Critics say he distanced himself from them, that he didn't challenge the regime forcefully enough, that his silence spoke volumes. But there's another story, one whispered by those who lived it, that Bergoglio used his position to hide the hunted, that he forged documents, that he created escape routes through church properties, that he negotiated with military leaders not with sermons, but with silence and strategy. Even Jalix, one of the priests taken, later wrote that he had reconciled with Bergoglio and no longer believed he had been betrayed. But the shadows remain, because the truth isn't clear. It never was. Documents surfaced. Testimonies contradicted. Survivors offered glimpses, but never the full picture. And Bergoglio himself, he spoke little, only saying, "I did what I could with what I knew." Was that enough? Was he protecting the church or protecting the people from the church? In the smoke of fear and control, there are no perfect heroes, only those who stood still and those who moved quietly between the lines. One thing is certain, he survived, not untouched, but changed, hardened, and watched. And decades later, when his name echoed in the halls of the Vatican, those same secrets followed him, like footsteps in the dark. Because some storms never pass. They just wait to be understood. By the late 90s, Jorge Mario Bergoglio had become Archbishop of Buenos Aires. The Vatican called it promotion, but Bergoglio didn't act like a man climbing a ladder. He gave up the palace, chose a small apartment, took the bus to work. When offered the trappings of power, he chose simplicity. Again, when invited to dine with politicians, he often declined. His meals were modest, his shoes worn. But what made him dangerous wasn't what he said. It was what he refused to play along with. While scandals shook the church in Europe, Bergoglio focused on Argentina's forgotten corners. While bishops debated doctrine, he was comforting addicts and visiting prisoners. He kept a rosary in his pocket, not a business card. And that humility, that refusal to perform, made him wildly unpredictable. Then in 2013, something historic happened. Pope Benedict XVI resigned, the first papal resignation in nearly 600 years. The official story? Failing health. The unofficial whispers? Power struggles. Scandals. Crisis behind closed doors. The church needed a new leader. Someone clean, unconnected. Someone who could calm the storm without becoming part of it. Enter Bergoglio. On March 13th, 2013, white smoke rose from the Sistine Chapel. And when the name was announced, most of the world said, "Who?" No fanfare, no grand pronouncements. He stepped onto the balcony with nothing but a gentle buona sera and a request. Pray for me. That wasn't performance. That was a statement. But here's the question. Was Bergoglio chosen or placed? Some believe he was a compromise candidate. Others think he was backed by reformists inside the church, a last-ditch effort to clean house. Still others say no one expected him to actually take control. But he did. And from the moment he stepped into the white cassock, it was clear this pope wouldn't sit quietly, because humility in the right hands becomes power. And power, when wielded by someone who doesn't want it, can change everything. It should have been a familiar ritual. The bells rang, the crowd gathered, the white smoke rose over Rome. And yet, when Jorge Mario Bergoglio stepped on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, everything felt off. No red mozzetta, no gold-trimmed stole, no raised arms in triumph. Instead, a pause, a stillness, and then just 2 words, buona sera. It was as if the script had been forgotten or rewritten. What followed wasn't a blessing from on high. It was a request. Before I bless you, I ask you to pray for me. The crowd fell silent. Then, an applause that wasn't just admiration. It was confusion, hope, shock, awe. For centuries, popes had emerged as kings, but this one bowed. Was it humility? Was it strategy? Or was it a signal that this papacy wouldn't follow the old rules? Inside the Vatican, the gesture landed like a thunderclap. No cape, no throne, no parade back to the apostolic palace. He took a plane car, paid his own hotel bill, and on his first day, he refused a papal apartment, choosing instead a modest guest house. His actions weren't symbolic. They were surgical, and the message was unmistakable. Power in this house would look very different now. Some were moved, others were unsettled, because gestures that look like peace can feel like revolution to those who hold the keys. And within days, the rumors began to ripple through the marble halls. If he would discard the cape, what else was he willing to remove? Because the Pope had arrived, but not as a ruler, as a disruptor. And the question on everyone's mind was no longer, who is this man? It was, what is he about to do? The world saw a gentle Pope with a smile and a soft voice. But inside the Vatican, a quiet war had already begun. Almost immediately, Pope Francis went after something untouchable: money. He opened the vaults of the Vatican Bank, an institution long whispered about in backrooms and buried reports. Audits were launched. Shadow accounts were traced. Powerful names, long protected, found themselves under scrutiny. And that's when things started disappearing. Allies were reassigned with no explanation. Internal memos were leaked to journalists. Sensitive letters, once locked in Vatican drawers, surfaced in the press. Coincidence or retaliation? Sources close to the Pope began whispering of something darker, of dossiers compiled on reformers, of surveillance inside the Pope's own residence, of hidden resistance led by a faction of high-ranking clerics who believed Francis was dismantling centuries of power, one humble gesture at a time. They didn't protest openly. They didn't need to. They delayed, redirected, buried decisions in endless committees. And the reforms, some quietly stalled, others vanished completely. The Pope, once hailed as a revolutionary, now walked a path lined with invisible landmines. Every homily was analyzed, every meeting watched. Even within his inner circle, loyalty became a question mark. He had once challenged dictators. Now, he faced something more elusive, an institution fighting to protect itself from its own leader. Because Francis wasn't just proposing changes. He was unmaking habits, disrupting networks, touching things that have been left untouched for centuries. And that's when another question began to rise. Subtle, whispered, dangerous. If reform was impossible from within, was someone quietly making sure it stayed that way? Because in the Vatican, power doesn't need to shout. It only needs to wait and watch. And Francis? He kept smiling. But behind the scenes, the walls were closing in. He came with no crown, no throne, no armies. Just a suitcase, a cross, and a message the world wasn't ready for. To some, Pope Francis is a prophet, the one who brought breath back to a church gasping for relevance. He speaks of mercy over judgment, of washing feet instead of kissing rings, of a faith lived in slums, not behind marble walls. But to others, he's a disruptor, a man who softened doctrine, shaken ancient traditions, and opened doors many believe were closed for a reason. His humility, strategic. His reforms, reckless. His papacy, a fire too close to the roots. And somewhere between these extremes is the truth no one agrees on. He's praised for challenging corruption, yet blamed for sowing division, applauded for embracing change, yet accused of bending too far, loved, feared, misunderstood, because behind every smile lies a silence, behind every blessing a boundary crossed, behind every word a battle still unfolding. So we're left with a question: has Pope Francis saved the church from itself, or invited a reckoning it cannot survive? That's for history to decide. But one thing is certain: Pope Francis didn't just inherit a legacy, he's rewriting it. And as for the ending, it hasn't been written, because it may depend on what happens next. If you're ready to follow the story the headlines won't tell, subscribe to The Hidden Angle, because sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones still unfolding.